You remember how back in the early 2000s and 10s everyone was obsessed with those abandoned exploration videos on YouTube? Like people would just wander into old crumbling buildings, film the whole thing, and somehow get millions of views? I wasn't one of those big creators, but I was around that scene. I'd just moved to Detroit after college, trying to make it as a freelance videographer. I was broke, living in a tiny studio apartment, and desperate for content that could go viral. That's how I ended up at the Static House. I'd heard about it from this guy named Marcus, who ran a local urbex forum. He was one of those guys who knew every abandoned spot in the city, and he'd post cryptic hints about new locations. The Static House was his latest find. He said it was this old Victorian mansion on the outskirts of the city, untouched for decades. The photos he posted were eerie, peeling wallpaper, shattered chandeliers, and this weird, almost unnatural stillness to the place. But what really caught my attention was the name. Marcus said it came from the constant static noise that filled the house, like an old TV left on. No one could figure out where it was coming from. I messaged him immediately asking for the address. He was hesitant at first, saying the place had a weird vibe, but I convinced him I was serious. I told him I'd credit him in the video, and he finally caved. The address he sent me was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by overgrown woods. Perfect for a creepy exploration video. I packed my gear, camera, tripod, a couple of batteries, and a flashlight, and headed out at dawn. The drive was uneventful, but as I got closer, the GPS started glitching. The screen would flicker, and the voice directions cut in and out with bursts of static. I figured it was just bad signal, but it put me on edge. When I finally found the house, it was exactly like Marcus described, a massive, decaying Victorian with a sagging roof and broken windows. The air around it felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me. I set up my camera and started recording. The static hit me as soon as I stepped inside. It wasn't loud, but it was everywhere, like the house itself was humming. I tried to ignore it and focus on the visuals. The cracked mirrors, the dusty furniture, the strange symbols carved into the walls. But the static kept pulling me back. It wasn't just noise. It felt alive, like it was watching me. I made my way to the second floor, where the static got louder. There was a door at the end of the hallway, slightly ajar. I pushed it open and found a room filled with old TVs. They were all different sizes, some from the 50s, others from the 80s, all stacked haphazardly on top of each other. And they were all on, playing nothing but static. My camera started glitching, the screen flickering with the same static as the TVs. I tried to shut it off, but it wouldn't respond. That's when I noticed something in the static, shapes moving just beneath the surface. At first I thought it was my imagination, but then I saw a face. It was blurry, distorted, but unmistakably human, and it was looking right at me. I bolted. I didn't even grab my tripod. I just ran out of the house, jumped in my car, and drove until the static faded. When I got home, I checked the footage. The first half was fine, but everything after I entered the TV room was corrupted. The file was just gone. I tried to tell myself it was a technical glitch, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. A few days later, I got a message from Marcus. He asked how the exploration went, and I told him everything. He didn't respond for a long time. When he finally did, all he said was, "You shouldn't have gone in there." I tried to ask him what he meant, but he blocked me. I never heard from him again. The weirdest part? A week after that, I started hearing the static. It's faint, like a whisper, but it's always there, no matter where I am. And sometimes, when I'm alone, I swear I see those shapes again, moving just out of sight. I don't know what I brought back from the static house, but I think it's still with me. There's an old storage facility on the outskirts of town, one of those places where people abandon their past. Foreclosed businesses, bankrupt dreams, things people left behind and never came back for. That's where he found the film. A guy named Mark, local indie filmmaker, always looking for weird, forgotten relics for inspiration. He'd been working on a horror short and wanted something real. Authentic vintage props, not the digital filters everyone fakes nowadays. That's how he ended up at Lot 86. The guy who ran the storage place let him dig through an old unit. Some studios lost inventory, untouched since the 70s. Mark found a box of dusty film reels buried under broken lighting rigs and script pages from dead projects. Most were nothing special, but one had no label, just a date written in shaky red marker. 1967. No title, no studio name, no other markings. Just that year. Of course, Mark took it home. That's where he fucked up. He had an old film projector, something he picked up at a flea market years ago. It was janky but still worked. He set it up, loaded the reel, and let it play against the blank wall of his apartment. At first, it was just static, then a flicker, a room, completely empty. Gray walls, concrete floors, a single wooden chair in the center. The film looked like security footage. No sound, just a low, humming white noise. The footage cut, jumping to another angle of the same room, slightly closer, then another. Mark waited for someone to appear. Nothing did. Just cuts, slow zooms, an empty chair. 10 minutes in, he almost turned it off. But right before he reached for the projector, the camera moved. It wasn't a cut this time. The shot shifted, turning slightly, like someone behind the camera was watching. Mark told himself he imagined it, but the next night he had to check. He played the reel again, watching closely. Same static, same empty room, same slow cuts. But something was different. The chair was closer to the camera. Not by much. Maybe a foot. He skipped back to last night's footage. The chair had definitely moved. No doors, no windows, no sign of anyone entering. It was just closer. He couldn't stop thinking about it. Maybe it was some experimental art piece. Maybe the chair was a trick, subliminal movement messing with his brain. Mark played the film again. The room was still empty. The chair was gone. Instead, there was a doorway, not in the film itself. On his wall. A perfect outline of a door, cast by the projector's light. A door that wasn't there before. Mark paused the film, and his breath caught in his throat. Because inside the paused frame, someone was sitting in the chair. He knew he shouldn't keep watching, but Mark couldn't stop. The next night he turned the reel back on, convinced he had to be imagining it. But this time, the film didn't start with static. This time, it started with his living room. The same angle, same lighting, same couch. It was his apartment. He froze. The footage wasn't old anymore. It was now. Mark lifted his hand. The film lifted its hand. Mark stood up. The film stood up. Mark reached for the projector. The figure on the screen turned its head and looked at him. Mark hadn't moved. Nobody knows what happened to Mark after that night. The cops found his apartment a week later after neighbors reported the smell. No signs of a break-in. No signs of him. Just the film reel still running in an endless loop. And the last frame ever recorded? An empty chair and a door, wide open. You know how every small town has that one urban legend that everyone whispers about but no one actually believes? In my hometown, it was the echo chamber. It was this old, abandoned recording studio on the edge of town that shut down in the 70s after some incident no one would talk about. The building was a crumbling brick eyesore, covered in graffiti and surrounded by chain-link fence. Kids would dare each other to break in, but no one ever stayed long. They said the place had a way of making you hear things you didn't want to hear. I was 17 when I decided to check it out. I was big into music back then, playing in a garage band with my friends, and I thought it'd be cool to film a music video in a legit old studio. Plus, I was bored. It was one of those endless summer nights where the air feels heavy and time just drags. My best friend Jake agreed to come with me, mostly because I promised him free pizza afterward. We waited until dark, then snuck through a gap in the fence. The studio was even creepier up close. The windows were boarded up, and the front door hung open like it was waiting for us. Inside, it was a time capsule, old recording equipment covered in dust, broken mic stands, and walls lined with soundproof foam that was peeling off in chunks. The air smelled like mildew and something else I couldn't quite place, like burnt plastic. We set up our gear in what used to be the main recording room. Jake brought his guitar, and I had my camera. We were just messing around, playing a few chords and filming random shots, when I heard it. At first, I thought it was feedback from the amp, but it was different. A low, resonant hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "You hear that?" I asked Jake. He nodded, looking uneasy. We tried to ignore it and kept playing, but the hum got louder, almost like it was reacting to the music. Then something weird happened. My camera started picking up voices. At first they were faint, just whispers buried in the static, but as we played, they got clearer. They weren't saying anything coherent, just fragments of words, like snippets of a conversation. I stopped playing and checked the footage. The voices were there, clear as day, even though no one had been speaking. Jake wanted to leave, but I was weirdly fascinated. I started experimenting, playing different notes to see if the voices would change. They did. It was like the room was tuning itself, zeroing in on something. Then I hit a specific chord, and the room went silent. For a second, I thought it was over. But then, the hum came back, louder than ever, and the voices started speaking in unison. They said my name. I froze. Jake looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice shaking. He shook his head. That's when I realized the voices were only coming through the camera. I played the footage back, and there it was, clear as day, a chorus of voices saying my name over and over. But the creepiest part? They didn't sound like strangers. They sounded like me. We got out of there fast. I didn't even pack up my gear, just grabbed the camera and ran. When we got back to my house, I tried to delete the footage, but it wouldn't go away. No matter what I did, the file kept reappearing on the memory card. I ended up smashing the camera with a hammer and throwing it in the dumpster behind the gas station. I thought that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. A few days later, I started hearing the hum again. It was faint at first, like a distant radio, but it got louder every day, and the voices came back too. They weren't just saying my name anymore. They were saying things only I would know. Secrets I'd never told anyone. Memories I'd tried to forget. It was like the echo chamber had found a way inside my head. I tried to ignore it, but it got worse. I'd be sitting in class and suddenly I'd hear my own voice whispering something I'd done years ago, something I was ashamed of. Or I'd be lying in bed, and the hum would start up, drowning out my thoughts. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't think. I felt like I was losing my mind. I went back to the studio one last time, hoping I could somehow undo whatever I'd done. But when I got there, the building was gone. Just an empty lot surrounded by chain link fence. I asked around town, but no one remembered the echo chamber. Not even Jake. It was like it had never existed. The hum and the voices eventually faded, but they never completely went away. Even now, years later, I'll hear them sometimes, usually when I'm alone. And when I do, I can't help but wonder if the echo chamber is still out there, waiting for someone else to stumble in and wake it up. I moved into 147 Carver Street because it was cheap. No credit check, no references, just a handshake with the landlord, and the promise to pay rent on time. This arrangement was most likely due to all the stories around town about this apartment complex being haunted. I heard it on the news once, but paid it no mind at the time. The apartment was nothing special, just a small one-bedroom with a creaky floor and a window that barely let in any light. I didn't care. I just needed a place to stay. What I didn't know, what no one told me, was that no one stays in this apartment for long. I quickly found out why. The first night, I woke up at exactly 3:12 a.m. to a knocking sound. It wasn't coming from the front door, it wasn't my neighbor, it was inside my apartment. I got up, still half asleep, and followed the sound down the hallway. That's when I saw it. A door. It hadn't been there before. No handle, no keyhole. Just a plain gray door that looked like it had always been part of the wall. The knocking was soft and rhythmic, like whoever, or whatever, was on the other side wasn't in a hurry. I reached out to touch it, but as soon as my fingertips brushed the surface, the knocking stopped. By morning, the door was gone. The hallway was normal again, like nothing had happened. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself I had imagined it. Sleep paralysis, maybe. A leftover dream. But the next night, at 3:12 a.m., it happened again. This time, something was different. There was a shadow underneath the door. A long, thin outline of feet, motionless, standing just on the other side. I backed away, heart hammering, but I couldn't bring myself to look away. And then, without warning, the shadow moved. The third night, I locked my bedroom door. I didn't go near the hallway. I didn't breathe. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to happen again. The knocking started at exactly the same time. Soft at first, then louder, closer, like whoever was on the other side knew I was ignoring it. Then, at 3:33 a.m., the knocking stopped, and I heard my name. A whisper, so quiet I almost convinced myself it wasn't real, but it was. The next morning, I called the landlord. "Has anyone ever reported weird things in this apartment?" I asked, trying to sound casual. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before he sighed. "Look, man, if you're having problems, just break the lease and go." His voice was flat, almost rehearsed. "I'll refund your deposit, no questions asked." My stomach twisted. "So, I'm not the first?" Another pause. Then he said something that made my blood turn cold. "There is no extra room in that apartment." That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room waiting, I don't know why. Maybe I just needed to see it one last time. At exactly 3:12 a.m., the knocking started. But this time, I didn't even have to walk down the hall. The door was already open. Just a crack wide enough to see into pure blackness. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. My body felt frozen, like something was holding me there. Then, from the darkness, something knocked from the inside. A single deliberate tap, then a voice. "Found you." By morning, I was gone. My keys were on the counter. My wallet was still on the nightstand. My car was in the parking lot. But I wasn't there. The landlord didn't even list the unit this time. Just repainted the walls, locked the doors, and waited. No one stays at 147 Carver Street for long, because the door always comes back, and the knocking never stops. Back in college, I worked the night shift at the university library. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and was quiet most of the time. The library was this massive Gothic-style building with towering bookshelves, creaky wooden floors, and those old-fashioned rolling ladders that looked straight out of a movie. During the day, it was bustling with students, but at night, it felt like a different world. The kind of place where you could hear your own heartbeat if you listened hard enough. My job was simple: reshelve books, help the occasional late-night studier, and make sure no one tried to sneak in after hours. The only rule was to never, under any circumstances, go down to the basement. It was off limits to everyone, even staff. The door was always locked, and the key was kept in the head librarian's office. I never thought much about it, until the night I found the key. It was around 2 a.m., and I was shelving books in the history section when I heard a faint knocking sound. At first, I thought it was just the pipes, but it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. I followed the sound to the head librarian's office, which was usually locked, but the door was slightly ajar. Inside, the knocking was louder, coming from the desk drawer. I opened it, and there it was. A small brass key with a tag that read, "Basement." I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the boredom or the eerie quiet of the library, but I took the key and headed downstairs. The basement door was exactly where I'd been told it was, tucked away in a shadowy corner of the first floor. The key fit perfectly, and the door creaked open to reveal a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The air was colder down there, and it smelled like old paper and something else. Something metallic. I flipped on the light switch, but the bulb flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the room. The basement was smaller than I expected, just a single room lined with shelves. But these weren't ordinary shelves. They were filled with books that looked ancient, their spines cracked and brittle, their titles written in languages I didn't recognize. I pulled one off the shelf and opened it. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, diagrams, and symbols that made my head hurt just looking at them. I flipped through a few more books and they were all the same: strange, incomprehensible, and unsettling. Then, I found something that stopped me cold. It was a photo album, but the pictures inside weren't normal. They were wrong. The faces were blurred, the backgrounds twisted, like the images had been taken in another dimension. And in every photo, there was a figure in the background, just out of focus, watching. I slammed the album shut and put it back on the shelf. That's when I heard it, a soft whispering sound like someone reading aloud. I turned around, but the room was empty. The whispering grew louder, more urgent, and I realized it was coming from the books. All of them. The entire room was filled with voices, overlapping and echoing like a chorus of ghosts. I backed toward the door, but it slammed shut before I could reach it. The voices stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then, one voice broke through, clear and distinct. It said my name. I don't know how I got out of there. I must have kicked the door open or something, but I ran up the stairs and didn't stop until I was back in the main library. I locked the basement door and put the key back in the desk, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the lock. I thought that would be the end of it. But the next night, I found a book on my cart that hadn't been there before. It was one of the books from the basement, its cover worn and faded. I tried to throw it away, but it kept reappearing, always in a different spot, on my desk, in my locker, even in my apartment. And every time I opened it, the whispering started again. I quit the job soon after, but the book followed me. I tried burning it, burying it, even dropping it in a river, but it always came back. The voices got louder too, and they started saying things about me, about my past, about things I didn't even know yet. It was like the book was feeding on me, pulling secrets out of my mind and turning them into words on the page. I don't know how much longer I can keep it hidden. The book's in a locked box now, but I can still hear the voices, faint and insistent, like they're trying to tell me something. And sometimes, when I'm alone, I swear I see that figure from the photos, just out of focus, watching me from the corner of the room. I was driving cross-country, taking my time, stopping whenever I felt like it. No real destination, just a road trip for the sake of it. Somewhere between Nevada and Utah, I made a mistake. I missed my exit. Not a big deal, right? GPS can reroute. But my signal cut out, so I figured I'd just take the next exit and loop back. That's when I saw it. Exit 43. No town listed, no services, just a faded green sign with peeling white letters. It didn't even look like an official highway exit, more like an afterthought. I took it anyway. The ramp curved downward into a narrow 2-lane road lined with trees. No lights, no traffic. Just a long, empty stretch of pavement leading into the dark. After about 10 minutes, the trees broke and I saw it. A town. But it was off. There were cars parked along the street, but no people. The diner on the corner had a neon open sign buzzing in the window, and through the glass, I could see plates of fresh food sitting on the counter, steam still rising. A barber shop had the old-school candy cane pole spinning. The gas station had pumps that looked new, and the prices were weirdly low, like decades out of date. It looked lived in, occupied, but it wasn't. I slowed down, rolling past the storefronts, looking for anything that made sense. The streetlights were on. The buildings weren't run down or abandoned. It was like everyone had just left mid-sentence. I kept driving until I saw the motel at the end of the strip. That's when my stomach dropped. My car was already there. Same make, same model, same dent on the rear bumper. sitting in the gravel lot parked neatly in front of room 6, and the keys still in the ignition. I slammed on the brakes. My car was running, the one I was in, so how the hell was it also there? Then my phone buzzed. No service, but somehow I had a text. Unknown number. Check in. We've been waiting. I nearly threw my phone. My skin went cold, and then I saw them. Silhouettes. In the windows. Not moving, not watching, just standing there. Shapes of people inside the buildings, pressed against the glass, still as mannequins. No faces, no eyes, just waiting. I floored it. Spun my car around so fast I nearly skidded into the curb. I didn't care. I just had to get the hell out. The headlights caught something in the rear view. A man standing in the middle of the road. No expression, no features, just a shape. And as I peeled out, tires kicking up dust, I swore I saw his mouth move. I couldn't hear it, but I knew what he said. "You'll be back." I never found exit 43 again. I tried, for weeks. Drove that stretch of highway a dozen times. No sign, no exit ramp. But sometimes at night when I'm driving alone, I see my taillights up ahead, and my phone buzzes. Check in. We've been waiting.